Hello and welcome to another 140k Mordian Glory video. Now before we get into today's video, I'd like to say a big thank you to Garrick21 for sharing some photos of his Imperial Guard forces with me. I actually plucked these out of the Mordian Glory Discord. We have a channel in there called Model Showcase. I was scrolling through that and I saw these absolutely fantastic alternative Death Korps Krieg models, and I had to absolutely show them off in one of my videos. So massive thank you to Garrick for sharing those photos in there, and I really hope you guys like them as much as I do. I think he's done a fantastic job of these guys. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, you can either share them in the Discord, or you can send them to me on Facebook, or email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. Now don't worry, all the links and everything you need will be down in the description below. Without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. Now today guys, I want to do an analysis of a faction that at one point was considered the ultimate and top army in all of 9th edition. An army that was described as the terror of the tabletops, the scourge of the meta. An army that was accused of being the very epitome of the bad codex writing and imbalance that has characterized a lot of 9th edition. I am talking about, of course, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the cog boys themselves. Now, that was what they were like at the beginning of 9th edition, but now the AdMech have truly fallen far from grace, and in fact you will find it an incredibly rare sight to see an Adeptus Mechanicus player anywhere near the tabletop these days, be it even on a casual level, but certainly at a competitive level they are few and far between. And why has that happened? What has caused such a dramatic shift over the last 12 months? Well, that's something that I want to take a little bit of a hazard at, a little bit of a guess at, and I would certainly appreciate your input as well. You see, I am not an Adeptus Mechanicus player. As you guys know, I am an Imperial Guard player. Occasionally, I am a bolt action player. But I am not an Adeptus Mechanicus player, so this perspective is entirely my own. This opinion is entirely based on what I have seen on the tabletop and what I know about 9th edition. But I would very much welcome an active comment section where you guys say what you think is the reasons behind the fall of the Adeptus Mechanicus from Terror to Toaster. Let's take a look at how this faction started out and where they've ended up. Now, one of the first reasons that I think AdMech have been struggling lately is because their codex was actually an early 9th edition one. And you see this happen a lot in Warhammer 40k. A faction gets an early codex, it's really powerful because everyone else is running around with 8th edition codexes. Everyone starts crying about the skies falling. GW nerfs them, and then the rest of the codexes start coming out, and suddenly you realise that AdMech wasn't actually overpowered, or the faction, whoever it might be, wasn't overpowered. It was just we hadn't seen the full big picture yet. I think that's happened initially with Adeptus Mechanicus, where they were like, yeah, they received some much needed nerfs, but maybe GW went too far, slapped them down too much, and then you found that, okay, yeah, they probably should have some of those nerfs walked back. Now, what's interesting with AdMech, and if you compare it to another faction like Dark Elder, is AdMech has actually had a lot of the nerfs walked back. A lot of the units that had core removed, they've had core given back to them now. And, you know, the Las Chickens, ones that were utterly terrifying, that were ripping everything apart, that everyone said were totally broken, they are back to their original state now, or near as damn it, but no one is running AdMech anymore. And it's like, okay, so there's something going on here, because if they've had the nerfs undone but people still aren't taking them, and you've got factions like Dark Elder who have retained a lot of nerfs but are still considered incredibly powerful, then surely it can't just be the fact they got slapped with a nerf hammer, and surely it can't just be the fact that other codexes have come out since and nerfed them down. Something's going on here. Why has Adeptus Mechanicus not picked itself back up? In fact, as of the time of recording this video, 0 Adeptus Mechanicus players were recorded playing at GTs over the weekend. That's absolutely insane. Imperial Guard had a higher win rate and a higher player rate than AdMech over the last month, essentially. So it's what is going on? Why haven't they picked back up? Because everyone was saying if you roll back the nerfs, they'll be fine. GW's roll back the nerfs and they're still not fine. So there must be something more to it than the fact that they're just an early codex that got nerfed, right? There must be something more to it. Well, I think there is. I think the main reason AdMech is struggling now, or the main reason that you're not seeing them being run at all now, is the fact that they're a very complicated army to use. And since they've come out, other factions have been revealed that and have had their codexes drop that have got the same, or if not more power as AdMech, but are far, far easier to pilot. So why would the competitive players, why would the meta players, why would the whackers continue to play a faction that is harder for them to use, which is going to have more brain drain and only yield the same results at best? I mean, you're just not going to, are you? You're just not going to. And I think if you look at the AdMech book, it is fundamentally very, very complicated. I remember people saying like the command phase of the AdMech players would be taking 10, 20 minutes every single turn because they had to layer on all these buffs. They had to keep track of so many different things. And I think that really was something that a lot of players enjoyed at the beginning of 9th edition because it was a fresh edition. People wanted to have that complexity. Something that 8th edition had been lacking was complexity. But as edition has gone on, people have gone, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to run an army that's way easier to pilot. Because you're seeing a lot of tournaments now go like 8 rounds to determine who's the top player. And if you've got a simple faction or a complicated faction, you're going to want that, but they both have the same results. You're going to want to use the simple faction, right? Because you're going to get to round 8, and if you've had to run 8 games of having to be 110% switched on every single time, your brain is going to be melting out of your ears. And so that's why I think a lot of the competitive players jumped away from AdMech, because they were so complicated. They were powerful, but they were complicated. Now that they're back to where they were, it doesn't matter because there's just an easier way to win the game now. And I mean, I know it's anecdotal evidence, but as someone who played against them a lot, their command phase always used to go on and on and on. And it seemed to be that they had to do different buffs from different people at different times. They had to choose which Shroud Sign they were going to be in, or which Canticle they were going to be in, or which Doctrine they were going to be in. It seemed there was so many different things that had to be going on, and they could only use one once, and they had to keep track of if they've used it already or not, and they've got to move from one to the next. And sometimes they can manipulate them, sometimes they can't, and it was all over the place, man. And I remember playing them so many times and just being like, God, you know, just get on with your command phase, man. Like, not like because my opponent's doing anything wrong, but I was just there sitting there exasperated. Like, as a guard player, I gain a CP. That's my command phase, you know. And it was just, like I said, it's anecdotal evidence, but their complexity always seemed to just be layered upon layers upon layers of the stuff, and it was very frustrating. Now, this kind of leads, you know, this complexity leads me on to and talking about competitive players as well, jumping faction, kind of leads me on to my next point, which is the reason you don't see a lot of Adeptus Mechanicus players around and why they're not doing very well anymore is because the faction is incredibly niche. And if it hadn't been for the fact that they were utterly broken at the time of their release, they would have stayed as a very, very niche faction. And I think what we see now in the player base and why the AdMech are struggling is the fact that the people that are still running AdMech are the ones that just like the models and love the faction and don't really have a super competitive mindset. Now, there's always exceptions that are going to prove the rule, don't get me wrong, but we're talking in generalizations now. So when AdMech were really, really good, that community on the surface really exploded. But actually, it wasn't the AdMech community that exploded. It was just the number of competitive meta chaser players that were jumping on the bandwagon and that were jumping on the faction. And so they were doing very, very well with them, and AdMech had a really high win rate, but that was just because a lot of people were using them at the time. It was a flash in the pan. Now that those players have, like we said, moved on to factions that are just as powerful but way easier to pilot, the people that are left over are the ones that were never going to do particularly well at tournaments anyway, because they're just not that mindset. They're just playing for fun, you know, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, you should always play for fun. So that is kind of reflective of why the AdMech sort of community isn't very present in the competitive scene anymore. Why sometimes you see weeks go by when no one takes AdMech to a tournament. And that's because these people aren't that diehard about going to tournaments. They might go to one if there's a local one in their area, but that's kind of it. But if that guy turns up and he's got his smorgasbord, a little unit of Scutari here, a little unit of servitors there, a little character here, a little tank there, if he turns up to a tournament, he's A, not even got the best list because he's just got what he likes, and B, he's not even got the best, you know, that competitive cutthroat mindset. He's just going to pick like secondaries, whatever, based on what he thinks are cool. Okay, and so you have this double doozy where the people that are sort of left now are the ones that were always what you could say are true AdMech players, and they're just there to have fun. And so that's why I think the AdMech sort of player base looks like it's shrunk. I don't think it has. I think it's just now it is just the true AdMech player base, not the inflated one from competitive players. And I think also that explains why they don't get great results, because those people that are still there aren't that bothered about winning games. They're just about having fun and turning up and playing with their guys. So that kind of explains why and the complexity sort of links into that, because these are the kind of players that, they've got a very complicated faction, so they're going to miss stuff. They're not going to be that bothered. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm coming across condescending, but these are the players that aren't going to be on it 100%, because they're just there to throw some dice down. So I think that kind of explains how the complexity is still like a problem for the faction, and it kind of explains why the player base is relatively small as well, because newer players may not want to pick up AdMech because they're not that easy to get a handle on. So you're kind of stuck with this to sort of cadre of players that like the faction but aren't necessarily top tier competitive players. Now the last point I want to make really comes down to how strong, how robust the whole of the codex was. You see, I think the Dark Elder Codex was really strong and has survived nerf after nerf, because fundamentally everything in that book was just very, very, very powerful. But with the AdMech, I actually think they were basically propped up by two data sheets. You had the Skitarii and you had the Chicken Walkers, and that was basically it. Whenever I face any of like the Servitor stuff or any of the other random shit that they've got in their codex, it just doesn't seem that powerful. Like Rustalkers are okay, but not great. They're kind of flimsy. The Trundle Tractor Boys with the big cannons on their arms, the Servitors, just not that bothered. They seem to be okay, but don't seem to be very good like rerolls or anything like that. I don't know, it just doesn't seem like anything else in the book was really that scary. And so when GW slapped down Skitarii and slapped down Chicken Walkers, you were kind of left with nothing. And yeah, they've walked back a lot of the nerfs on those units, but I guess the meta's just moved on, and people just aren't that bothered about collecting those units anymore. I don't know. What do you guys think? For me, it seems like outside of Skitarii and Chicken Walkers, AdMech just weren't that scary. But that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe, and also commenting down below what you think. Do you think there's anything I've missed? Anything else that might be contributing to the fact that AdMech are no longer the scourge of the tables? Let me know down in the comment section below. Now, if you've really enjoyed today's video, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to my channel members and my patrons that I'm able to do this gig full time now and do much more analysis videos than I used to. So if you like this kind of content, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to our latest channel members and Patreon supporters. So massive thank you to AL Craft, Atremus Let's Play, Funny Creature, Lackland Coles, Scott Gregory, Nick Smith, The Goggles They Do Nothing, Auto15, Trevor Lane, Joseph Wrigley, Gianna Carlo, Death to the Grey, Witch Hunter Guy, Moritz, Polaris Eternia, Lehman Russ, Lax Comics and Joe Ken. Thank you guys for becoming channel members, and thank you for doing your part. I also want to say a thank you to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a big thank you to Antonio, DK126, Polaris, Jacob Holden and the Major 91. Thank you guys for going the extra mile and supporting me on Patreon. It's really, really appreciated. Now, last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty when it comes to supporting my channel. So a massive thank you, a big 07 to Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your support it's amazing. I know I say it every time, but it's really, really appreciated. So thank you so much. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.